speakers. Well, with that, I am going to introduce Dr. Scott Turansky. We've had him on before, and he was really well liked, a popular favorite speaker from the things he has to share. So just a little bit about him before he comes. You can go ahead and bring your audio and video up. So you live in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. And you said you began working with parents when you directed a preschool in the early 80s, and you just thought parents lack some skills that would help them. And that was your mission. And you jumped in and you developed a love for helping parents and using the scripture. Now, I was saying to you this afternoon in the practice session that you've got these fun things on your website. It turns out that, yes, it is biblicalparenting.org. But when I clicked on Scott Turansky in my Google search, it came up and it went to that. And I didn't notice that that was actually the name of your website, biblicalparenting.org. But I just have to say this because this was fun. You love Mexican food. You love birds. And I love this one, Scott. You have 10 bird feeders in your backyard. And you have an iPhone app that calls birds to this area in your backyard. Maybe some of us will follow up with that. I love that. And you love your iPhone. You do lots of fun things on your iPhone, such as start your car, regulate the heat in your house, and find the closest Mexican restaurant. So you got lots of wonderful, fun things in your life, but most importantly, a love for Christ, a love for parents, and a love for sharing your information with us tonight. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Barb. It's an honor to be with you guys, and I'm grateful to partner with the Legacy Coalition and the folks here. It's just an honor. We have such an important job as grandparents, and so spending time talking about some of the issues that our grandchildren are involved in is very important. I am a professor at Concordia University, where I teach the master's level parenting class to all of the people who are going to be counselors, coaches. They're going to be social workers, pastors, children's pastors. They go through my class if they're getting this degree, and each one of my students must work with a parent while they're in the class. We want the program to be very personal. We want it to be very practical. And out of that, then I developed what we call the Biblical Parenting Coaching Program. And in that, I've trained over 400 coaches. And those coaches work individually with parents one-on-one to deal with all kinds of problems that they experience, whether it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, anger explosive issues, defiance, all kinds of things that children experience, we deal with. And we take parents into the hearts of children in order to help them make changes. So tonight we're going to look at one specific issue, and I just welcome all of you who've joined with us tonight. It is my desire to share with you how we can help children accept no as an answer. I think it's a very important concept that we want our children to understand and learn. So as we share these things together, I think you're going to go away not just looking at the surface things, not just looking at behavior, but I'm going to take you into the heart of a child. I want you to see what's going on inside, because when we can help children change in their hearts, then we have done something very significant, only by God's grace, because God designed a person, and this heart is the place where tendencies are. So when a child has a tendency to erupt with anger, a child has a tendency to just say no or ignore you when you give an instruction, those are the tendencies we're working on. And so we've developed all these strategies based upon the way God relates to us in order to bring change into the lives of children. So in order for us to get into our topic today, I want to help you understand a little bit more about emotions themselves. Every person, every child must have a plan for 3 emotions. Every child must have a plan for dealing with anger, must have a plan for dealing with sadness, and must have a plan for dealing with anxiety. We're going to experience those in our lives. And in order to do that, we have to do some work, some practice sessions, some growth, some development. And parents are the primary counselors for their children. They are the best trainers, and we as grandparents then step in and support and encourage them along the way. So briefly, let me just say that in any of those emotions, one of the key things we need to learn how to do is let it go. But God gives us some exercise strategies. When it comes to anger, he gives us love, and when we exercise love, anger starts to dissipate. That's why 1 Corinthians 13:4-5 says, love is not easily angered, because it's all on a continuum. The more anger you have, the less love you can have. And the more love you have, the less anger you can have. So if you practice love, we can really reduce the anger in some significant ways. Now we're working in the heart of a child. We're also see that in the area of sadness, the practicing work is the area of joy. That sadness and joy are on a continuum. And if we're practicing joy, that sadness starts to decrease in our lives. And so we want to teach our children what that looks like. That's where we'll spend our time tonight. But just briefly to say that, of course, the solution for anxiety is to practice peace. God has given us that. Now, these could be human things that we do, but God has designed love, joy, and peace and other things to be spirit-filled qualities. They're fruits of the Spirit. And so we are able to take on the spiritual power that God gives us to have emotional health. We want our children and our grandchildren to be spiritually healthy, emotionally healthy, mentally healthy, and a life that understands God and it has God in the heart and God is working is the best way to achieve those goals. But before I talk a little bit more about disappointment and accepting no as an answer, let me just take you into the heart for a moment. There's lots of things in the heart. I'm not going to talk about all of these things. I've written that book, Parenting is Heart Work, that was given away tonight, and you can find on my website. But it really talks about all these things in the heart. And when we understand a heart-based approach to working with children, major things take place. But in particular, I want you to look at the bottom one there, desires. Because when children come to us with a desire and we say no to them, they have to wrestle with something inside of the heart. And that's where we're working. In this very room of the heart where disappointment starts to grow, our children need to have a plan for their sadness. I call it a plan for misery management. We almost have one in order to be able to move forward, but it starts with desires. The Bible tells us that we delight ourselves in the Lord. He will give us the desires of our hearts. Now, I only share that verse to show you that the Bible says desires are inside of the heart. But when desires get strong, they turn into expectations. So some of our children have strong desires and they have these expectations. And when life doesn't go the way they expect, then, well, we end up with some challenges because children are pretty set. They need to become more emotionally flexible in their lives. And that's part of what our training does for them. So desires are going to be a key area here as we go in to talk about disappointment and accepting no as an answer a little bit more. But when desires become expectations and those expectations become stronger, they turn into demands. So there's these internal demands inside that if they're not met, children often erupt with emotion. That's the second thing you'll see at the bottom there that's inside of the heart. And when children have an emotional investment in their desires, we have a perfect storm waiting to be touched off by a no answer. So it's very important to understand that we're not just talking about behavior here. We're talking about something deeper inside of the heart of a child. And as we are helping children to become more emotionally flexible, as we're helping children to grow in their ability to accept no as an answer, good things will happen, not just for now. We're not just helping a 4-year-old learn how to stop whining or a 14-year-old deal with their anger episodes. What we're doing is building adults. We're building children who are growing into these life skills they'll need for the rest of their lives. So it's the heart where we work. That's where we want to spend our time. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you some heart-based strategies that we use in the biblical parenting coaching program to help children who are particularly challenged in this area of not being able to accept no as an answer. Well, let's talk about what disappointment looks like. I know you already know this if you have children who have a hard time accepting no as an answer, but the real issue is that they're disappointed because they don't get what they want. The I want in their heart is screaming out, and when their desires aren't met, then they experience this disappointment. And so we know that some children argue. and the arguing gets to be a problem. Now, one of the things we teach parents is as soon as you find yourself arguing, you need to move from the issue to the process. Don't keep talking about wearing that shirt again, or the video that you want to watch, or the snack that you're going. As soon as you start arguing about the issue, then you want to stop that process and you want to move to the process. Now, the process is the way we're treating each other. See, it does very little good, as you probably know, to argue with a child when they want something, because children aren't trying to learn something at that point. They're just becoming more entrenched in their position. So when you say, no, you can't have this, a child might say, why? And you have an answer for the why. So you give them that answer and they say, but, well, you have an answer for the but too. So you're into this arguing before you even realize it. See, when a child is struggling inside of this part of the heart, then arguing does very little good, because it just entrenches a child in their position. And what they really need is they need to be able to wrestle in that place in their heart and to let it go and to learn to accept no as an answer. So the arguing becomes part of the arena where the child is working, and one key truth is to move from the issue, stop talking about the issue, and start talking about the process, the way you're treating me right now. This is so important, because here's what happens. If a child is arguing with you, or let's say even being disrespectful and yelling at you, and you keep talking about the issue, in essence, you're validating their poor interaction with you. You're validating their process. So what you want to do is move to the process and say, the way you're treating me right now is inappropriate. I'm not even going to talk about this, because what you're doing right now is wrong. So we move to the process. We refuse to talk about the issue. Arguing is just one of those things that takes place when children can't accept no as an answer. A second one is whining. Whining takes place when children, I think, believe that if they're uncomfortable, they have the right to make everyone else miserable. And so this whining becomes this problem that children have. And again, we often want to take swift action at that point. And I'm going to suggest as we go on that one of the ways we help children is with firmness. That sometimes we just say to a child, I'm sorry, go back out and try again. And we refuse to interact with them when they're whining. Some children whine because they believe that's how they solve problems. And unfortunately, whining often works. And so children come into the kitchen and they say, I'm hungry. Well, that's not with a whiny voice, but they're focusing on the problem instead of on the solution to say, I'm hungry. And so, oh, you're hungry? Well, let me solve that problem for you. Or if a child starts whining, parents sometimes give in and give their children what they want because they're whining, and you hate that whining and you just want it to stop. So what we want to do as we're working with our children, grandchildren, is we want to step in and sometimes take a firmer approach and say, well, I can't talk to you with that kind of a voice. Another time when children can't accept no as an answer, they start complaining. I like to say that there are two kinds of children in the world. There are those who complain and those who solve. Complainers focus on the problem. Solvers focus on the solution. If a child comes into the kitchen and says, I'm hungry, they're complaining. I would say, look, you're focusing on the problem. That's complaining. Go back out, come back in, and try again. This time, focus on the solution. Well, what is the solution for a child who's complaining or hungry? Well, the solution is, Mom, could I please have a snack? Then you're focusing on the solution instead of on the problem. Now, this is so important. Just think, there are so many adults today who believe that whining is how you solve problems, that complaining is how you get action. It is not the best approach. We need more solvers, fewer complainers in the world. And so we're going to help children right now learn how to accept no as an answer. Part of what I'm doing right now is to show you how important this subject is and how powerful it is when we start to work on it with those children. But sometimes children develop an attitude. An attitude tends to focus on a particular object, an attitude toward math, or an attitude toward chores, or an attitude even toward a person, a brother or a sister. They develop this bad attitude and they start developing an attitude toward that. That's different than moodiness. Moodiness tends to be this all-pervasive, bad, sad experience that a child has. And some children, when they can't accept no as an answer, just move into that, and they are just stuck in a mood that needs to be addressed. All of this, think about it, is inside of the heart of a person. And we also see that some children respond with anger. Now, remember, I said there was anger, sadness, and anxiety. that children experience. We're in the sadness category. But the reality is sometimes children, when they get really sad, they turn it into anger, and they express that anger in ways that are hard or not good. So I just want you to see now, we're working in the heart of a child. The heart contains the tendencies, the way children process life, and it comes out in their behavior. We want to be working on the inside and helping children make some significant changes. Now let's talk about the why. Why do we want to help children accept no as an answer? Well, the first reason that I would suggest we want to help children accept no as an answer is to learn how to handle disappointment. This is misery management. We all have disappointments in our lives. We all need to be able to manage these in our hearts. Very important for us to understand these as we're trying to work forward with our children and our grandchildren. Handling disappointment is a strategic part of what we do. I'll come back to that list in just a moment, but I just wanted to go back here that sadness is a problem that everybody needs to have a plan for, and we need to let it go, and we need to practice the joy. We've got to come to that in our lives. We're going to do a bunch of things to get there, but I just want you to see where we are in the bigger map. The second thing that children must do is learn to live within limits. You see, when a parent or grandparent says no to a child, they have to live with that. They have to live within limits. This is so important. And I think as grandparents, we often want to give a lot of things to our grandchildren. We want to bless them with all kinds of things. We have the money, we have the time, we have the resources. We want to give them experiences. We want to do all kinds of things for them. And so we tend to like to pour it on for them. But sometimes it would be wiser for us to set limits on children so they can learn to live within the limits that will help them for the rest of their lives. You see, let's talk about overindulgence for a moment. We sometimes, as grandparents, are critiqued for our being overindulgent with our grandchildren. But let me explain to you what it means to overindulge. It's not wrong to give our grandkids lots of things or our children lots of things. The real test isn't how much they receive, it's how much their character is able to handle. Because children who start to get sometimes want more and more, and it just appeals to their selfishness. So sometimes the loving thing for us to do is to say, no, we're done. No, that's enough video games for today. No, we're not having a snack now. We're going to have a snack. We're going to have lunch in a half hour. Sometimes we set limits and we teach children to live within those limits. Now, just think about adulthood, because isn't it true that as adults, we have to live within limits? If we don't learn to live within limits, we have a hard time staying on a budget, or we have a hard time staying on a diet. Learning to live within limits is strategic for anybody, and it starts at 3 years old, or 7 years old, or 10 years old, or 13 years old, as children are learning to accept no as an answer. That's why it's so important. Kids need to learn to live within limits, and it does some great things to help them to be able to respond better to life situations, not only now, but also in the future. So we're teaching children a valuable thing as we're teaching them how to live within these limits. And that's going to lead us to, I just want to point out that whenever a child gets a no answer, they have to engage in grief management. And you know the 5 stages of grief, but let me just show you what this looks like when a child gets a no answer. Let's say you say to your 14-year-old, no, you can't go to the party on Friday night. That's not the kind of parties, and the parents aren't home. We're not going to do that. And so what is the child's first response when they don't have a good response to no answer? It's denial. I can't believe that you're doing this, that no other parents are stopping their kids. Everybody gets to go to this party, but no, I can't do that. Next comes the anger. You say, you are the strictest parents in the whole world. And children say things like, I hate you and whatever. Their anger is just right in there. Then they go away for a little bit and they come back and bargain. Oh, Mom, I'll work really hard to get my grades up, and I'll do my chores and my brother's chores too if you'll let me go to the party. And if parents are holding in there with a no answer, the child just becomes depressed, discouraged, and parents sometimes give in at that moment. But really, what needs to happen is children come to this place of acceptance where they say, okay, I'm not going to get this. Okay, I need to live with the no answer. I need to live within limits. That's why we're teaching children how to live within limits. It's a very important part of what they do. We're teaching children how to grieve over simple things so that they can handle disappointments in their lives. There are some children who are taught in our Christian homes that God is going to solve your problems and he's the answer to life. And we emphasize that side of our theology so much that those kids grow up just believing that God is going to help them so much and God's going to protect them and so on. And then when a bad thing happens, a relationship falls apart or a trauma happens in their lives, they go, whoa, this doesn't work. God must not exist because he didn't give me what I needed. And so very important for us to help our children experience a little bit of suffering in their life, sometimes learn to live within limits, and that's okay because we're helping them see that God is at work in our lives, even in the challenging times, not just in the good times. The third thing we need to do is teach children more about contentment. Contentment is the ability to live within limits, to choose joy in the midst of the whatever I have. And so being able to be content within the limits is important. The challenge is with young people sometimes is they go outside of the limits. When I say limits, I'm talking about limits of society. The society of a family, they violate family rules. The society of the school, they violate the school guidelines. Even society, the law of the land that they violate. And often they do it for two reasons. One is because they want identity, to be with others, and so we have this identity of going outside the limits. And then the other is because of a pursuit of pleasure. And pursuit of pleasure is a dangerous thing for children. Pursuit of pleasure is not our goal. Here's the problem. When a person pursues pleasure, they end up with addiction. Now, pleasures are good. God says, in my presence, you'll have pleasures forevermore. So there's this pleasures are good, but they can't be our goal. The goal is to live a mission-oriented view of life, and pleasures are the byproduct of that sometimes. So we're trying to help children know what that looks like. So learning contentment is important. And then also practicing gratefulness. I would suggest gratefulness is one of the most strategic mental health exercises that anyone can do. I was working with one of my clients, a pediatrician, was struggling with her daughter, and we were talking about this very issue of not being able to accept no as an answer. And I suggested doing some gratefulness therapy with her, where she had to write down 3 things she was grateful twice a day to try to help her change her focus from the things she can't have to the things that she does have. And the pediatrician says, oh, it sounds like the principle of 3. And I says, I don't know what you mean, what she's saying. She says, well, in the medical profession, we encourage gratefulness. We think it's the greatest mental health exercise someone could be involved in. These are not Christians. This is just in the medical profession. In fact, she says, there's studies been done that if people will engage in gratefulness therapy like that, it often has greater results than some of the mood-altering drugs that we provide to them. So gratefulness is a strategic exercise that we engage in order to help our children to grow and develop. All right, so here's the question you're probably asking now. Okay, we understand the why. This is really important. What we're doing is to help children accept no as an answer, but how do we do it? Let me try to give you some practical tips that some of the parents are using in the Biblical Parenting Coaching Program. One is just realize, again, your job is not to make your kids happy. I think that sometimes as grandparents, especially, we want to make our children happy. And when we do, we rob them of opportunities to work inside of that special place in the heart where they must learn to live within limits, accept no as an answer, grieve over the loss of something they wish they could have, lessen their desires, emotionally uninvest from those desires, become more emotionally flexible. You see, that's really important. So we don't want to just give kids things in order to stop their whining and complaining or arguing or whatever. We want to help our children to make some strategic changes here, and they have to wrestle in their hearts. We create the arena, and we often create the arena for them to wrestle by saying no. I'm not saying we're mean to our kids or grandchildren. What I'm saying, though, is that children need to get into the arena, and if we're always giving them things, they don't have to go into that place. And in order to have a plan for dealing with sadness, in order to have a plan for misery management, you must go into that place of the heart where things don't always go the way you'd like them to go. So sometimes we say no. to a child. That's part of what we do. A second thing that we do is we stop the process earlier. When a child walks into the room and announces something, and then we start entering into arguing or complaining or whining, we know those are the symptoms. Then one of the great things we can do is we can say, well, we can't talk about this. I can't continue talking about it because of the way you're treating me. So we stop the process earlier. There's some children who seem to have a bent to continue to ask things that you have to say no to. I mean, some children just seem to have that bent. I'm going to keep asking you questions, and I'm going to have to. And so the parents put in this awkward place of having to say no every time you turn around. And so no becomes this answer. We don't want to do that. We don't want to be grandparents. We're saying no all the time. But some children continue to ask questions we have to say no to. Maybe they're wearing us down, so that eventually we'll say yes. I don't know. But some children are in the habit of asking those questions. So again, it's sometimes helpful, even when they ask the question, to say, you can't ask me any questions that I have to say no to right now. I want you to contribute to the environment of this room without asking a question or asking permission to get something. Ask me a question about myself. I'd love to talk to you about who I am and what I do and about my life. But don't ask me if you can do something else like watch video games or have another treat or something when we've already said no. So stopping the process earlier is a very practical tool that we can exercise with our children. Another thing you want to be careful of is arguing kids into joy. Now, kids do need to move into joy, but sometimes parents try to argue their children into joy. Arguing entrenches people into their own position. So it's best if you find yourself arguing to move to the process again and not continue to dialogue about that. I think it's good to dialogue with kids, but there's some places where dialogue gets in the way. When you give an instruction to a child and they don't want to do it, so they start the dialogue. Sometimes we just say, look, you need to obey first, and then we'll talk about it. Because we want to talk to children about things. But sometimes this is another time when children are arguing that sometimes we just don't get involved in the process, because getting involved in that process, that dialogue, is counterproductive and entrenches children and actually validates their process. So those children then sometimes are engaging in things that aren't appropriate and aren't helpful, just the way they're interacting. The fourth thing we do is to transfer responsibility to the child for misery management. Choose joy. This is a major principle that we engage in at the National Center for Biblical Parenting. As we're coaching families one-on-one and helping that family change, one of the key things we do with children is we transfer responsibility to the child. Here's why this is so important. Children who have a poor response to their own misery often view themselves as victims. And this victim mentality tends to blame other people for their problems, and they don't take responsibility. So we transfer responsibility to the child. If a child comes in and says, I'm bored, and we're the grandparent or parent, what do we want to do? Oh, well, here, let me give you an idea. Let me solve your problem. We would suggest that solving a child's problem like that probably isn't the best thing to do. It might be better to say, here's what you need to do. I'm going to give you 5 things you can do when you're bored besides electronics. You take these things into the hall and you decide which category you want to work on. You can line them up yourself. Maybe you could be creative, art, music, drama, so on. Maybe you could learn something, read a book, or go do a science experiment, or just look out in the backyard. You'll learn all kinds of things. Or maybe you could build relationship with someone. Or maybe you could serve someone. Maybe you could do some spiritual growth. I mean, you can list as many of these you want, but I always like to leave the last one is the wild card. Because when you go sit down and think about it, God has given you a brain and an imagination that can take over boredom in a moment. See, what we're doing in that experience and just in that idea is to transfer responsibility to the child. This is your problem. Your misery is your problem. You need to make a change here, and you need to choose joy. I hope that I'm not overemphasizing the firmness here, because I do believe that when children are disappointed and suffering, one of the things we can do is empathize with them. Sometimes the comfort that a parent or grandparent gives a child is so meaningful and touching, but that's different than encouraging their inability to accept no as an answer. You want to balance firmness and relationship. In fact, we have 7 tools that we use in the National Center for Biblical Parenting and the coaching program in order to draw from those buckets in order to bring solutions. So sometimes we do offer sympathy and comfort for children because it is disappointing that they can't go to the party on Friday night. Or it does make them sad that they can't be involved in more video games right now. And so we can come along and comfort. So comfort is a key ingredient in what we do with children, but it's not the only thing we do. We certainly don't want to feed a selfishness in children that always wants more and more and more. That's why we use the no answer. It really addresses much of the selfishness that's experienced in the heart. And then the last thing I suggested there is to use training, not just correction. And this training is so significant because, well, correction focuses on the problem, but training focuses on the solution. So when we're working with families, we're not just saying, okay, let's get rid of this and let's get rid of that. And, oh, you're having a problem there. We're saying, all right, if the problem is defiance, let's work on cooperation. If the problem is anger, let's work on self-control and being able to be peaceable in life situations. And then we're going to practice where we're going instead of where we are right now. I don't have time to go through all of these things, but here's just some ideas. The scriptures say, train yourself to be godly. We've engaged in our families that we work with a lot of different exercises. We believe that the exercises that children do change the tendencies they have in their heart. If your child needed physical therapy, then they'd be doing exercises on the floor, walking on the beam and so on. If your child needed speech therapy, they'd be doing exercises with the mouth in the lab. We believe a lot of children need character therapy. Parents are the trainers and grandparents support them in that training. And so as we have opportunity, we're going to help bring about that work that needs to take place. So contentment exercises and thankfulness drills, and a mission-oriented view of life, emotional flexibility workouts, obligation training. You're saying, well, what are those? How they work? Well, just think about what it might be if you're going to exercise those things with children. One of the ways we do that is we say no to a child, but we empower them with a plan. One mom said, here's what I do with one grandma said to her granddaughter. I taught my granddaughter when I have to say no to her that she can say these words. I'm disappointed, but it's okay. The granddaughter was 4 years old. I'm disappointed, but it's okay. What a great thing. That's an exercise where here's a young girl at 4 years old learning how to respond better to life situations. That's powerful. That's what we're trying to do as we're working with our children. So those are a few ideas. I'm trying to give you the theology behind this idea. So it's not just a surface topic. I'm trying to give you practical strategies and ideas to work with this one particular problem that a child might have of not being able to accept no as an answer. Hope you can take that and you can run with that as you're trying to work with your children. Thank you very much for having me on. Barbara, I'm going to throw it back to you at this point.
That's it. All right. If you can come back up, Scott, turn your audio and video on, and I am going to ask you a few questions. Okay, here we go. Is it too late for a 3-year-old who controls his parents with temper tantrums? As a grandparent, I have to sit and watch it. How can I help? That's a good question.
It is, and it really draws reference to the influence we have or don't have in a given situation. And so as I'm working with parents and grandparents, we have to look at what sphere of influence we have, and we maximize what we can do. So if I'm working, let's take a different example, the example of a child who goes between 2 homes, and dad's saying, well, I'm trying to do what I can, but mom does things completely differently. I say, well, let's use the influence you have and maximize that. So if you only have your grandkids, 2 or 3 days in a month, or they come and visit every once in a while. I mean, it's easier to have them when parents aren't around, and then we can have the freedom to do what we want. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to use the influence we have, and the exercises that we do are in-life exercises. You don't have to get out a book, and you don't have to go through a curriculum. We're just taking the common things. Child's coming in and living life, and we're correcting that child, and we're training that child to respond in a different way. We do that with manners. we can also do that on a heart level to make things more significant in that way. So it's in life training. Sometimes all you can do is give recommendations. Maybe you can recommend a book, but it's hard to recommend a parenting book to one of your own kids who has kids, because it's like you're saying, hey, your parenting isn't any good. But
Right.
even to say, I heard this speaker and he's got a book, I'd be happy to get that for you. So, looking for ways to use the influence you have.
Yeah. That's good. An in-life training. I really like that. Here's a question. Where does changing topic or diverting attention to something else fit in with an arguing child? Is that helpful or not?
It's a really good question, because it's not wrong. What you're saying is, what about distraction? There are some preschools that have as their rule, we're never going to say no to children. We're always going to distract them. That's really common in preschool education today. And what we're saying, that's a big mistake, because if just think of what's going on inside of the heart. When you say to a child, oh, here, have this over here, what you're saying, you're appealing to the selfishness in that child. And you're saying, I'll give you something you want more than you currently have. Now, we do distract a baby by giving them a mirror while you're changing their diaper. We do distract a teenager and say, hey, we've already got something planned on that night. Instead of going to the party, we've got this great thing planned at our house. And so we do distract them with other things. So it's not wrong, but just be careful that you don't overdo distraction, because when you do that, then children don't have to wrestle in their hearts. You've taken them out of the arena. The arena is very important, that sometimes we just say no and let kids work on that inside. Very important for children to exercise that in their hearts.
Yeah, very good. How do you handle the grandchild who constantly wants to know the detailed plan for upcoming activities and is incessant with questions?
Yeah, it's hard. See, that's an anxiety issue. Okay, a child who wants control, wants to know what's going on. We ought to spend a whole evening talking about anxiety, since it's such a major issue in our time today. We want to challenge this child by saying, look, here's what I want to do. I'm going to tell you some things that are going on, but I'm not going to tell you everything, because I want you to learn how to trust. Because the opposite or the antidote for anxiety is learning how to trust. So I want you to trust me that we're going to be okay here. I've got it covered. And I'm going to tell you some things we're doing, but some things I'm not going to tell you. And let's see if we can work with that. Can you do that? And some children's anxiety doesn't allow that. So we have to kind of keep feeding them information. But we're challenging. We're back to transferring responsibility. I want to challenge you not to get upset about all of this, and see if you can go along without knowing the next thing that's going to happen. That's not easy, but do you see what we're doing? We're working in the child's heart. We're transferring responsibility. We're challenging them to get out of their control mindset and let go of some of that anxiety that they have. And the key is to trust. Trust parents, trust God, trust that we can go forward.
If our listeners were to choose maybe one of your books that you think would be a good one to start with, if they'd want to do that, what would that be?
Well, one of the key books that's used in 3 seminaries now, it's a very powerful book is the book Parenting is Heart Work. That book really helps you understand what the heart is from a biblical perspective. And it gives you so many tools to counter the reward punishment model that's typically out there, even in Christian homes. So instead of using reward punishment, what tools are we going to use? Well, we have to understand the heart. The second book is the Motivate Your Child book. That's the book that is like Parenting is Heart Work number 2, but we call it Motivate Your Child, which talks about internal motivation and how children are wrestling with things in their hearts. It's really where the plan is. And I think parents would benefit from that book as well.
Yeah. And I started tonight and I talked about the fact that Grand Monday nights, one of the goals is to teach us. And here's just an example of this tonight, where this particular area of teaching our grandchildren is so important, and you're giving us some steps, teaching us more about how we can do it, bringing things to our attention that we may not have thought of. So thank you. Very, very helpful. Now, Frank wants to know if if we could show that last screen again. I'm not sure we can back up to that, but Frank, if you tomorrow at some point we'll have a replay. Oh, okay, all right. Looks like Gary was able to do it. So here it is. So he asked if you could maybe give one or two more examples as you wrap up your thoughts.
Yes. Now this is where we're getting into the hands-on exercises that we do. And before I do that, let me just say this. We at the National Center for Biblical Parenting are looking for more coaches who want to be trained to work with families. Parents need these things, and grandparents are great coaches. If they develop an understanding, we'll train you. In 8 weeks, we'll teach you exactly how to use all of these tools that we're talking about. I just threw up a bunch of names here. These are some of the tools that we use. I already mentioned the thankfulness drills, but one of the ways we use that with a child who tends to focus on the negative instead of being grateful is we will have them at 10 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon write down 3 things they're grateful for. You see what we're doing? We're exercising. It's Jesus who said it's out of the heart that the mouth speaks. And so what we're trying to do is evaluate what's coming out of the heart through the speech, and we're taking that back in and saying, okay, let's have some drills here where we can work on this a little bit more. When we do emotional flexibility workouts, what we're doing is we're testing the places where children get off track. When a child gets off track with an anger episode, or they're disappointed, or they're anxious, where is that? We want to do some work there. For example, many times we'll do this during transitions, because when you move a child from one activity to another, that's where something happens. The emotional flexibility needs to take place because they're emotionally invested in their activity. So we'll give them a plan. We always give kids a plan before we start working it, so that they have a plan to work on. We often develop that with them, and then we interrupt them more. We call them maybe 20 times in a day, emotional flexibility workouts. That's the kind of thing that we're doing. The obligation training is all about the I need to that we're developing in child's heart to overcome the I want to. There's a wrestling in every heart, I need to versus I want to. And obligation training is essential. It's developed right in the home. So that's what responsibility is all about. When the I need to becomes stronger than I want to, very important piece of things that are going. That's just a few ideas there.
So you're mentioning people who may want to study this, and they contact you and find out what that looks like?
Sure. They can go to biblicalparenting.coach. That's another one of our 9 websites, biblicalparenting.coach. And when they go there, they'll see how they can become a coach. The process is beautiful. I just feel like when I'm coaching a family, I feel like I'm participating in the feeding of the 5,000. Like one of those disciples that's handing out food and miracles are taking place. And I go, oh, this is so cool. Because parents really change when you use a heart-based approach. There's no other way to work with parents that's more effective than a heart-based approach. We have a clinical psychologist who's doing research in our program now and coming out with statistics that show how powerful this program is. So we're really excited about it. We'd love to have more coaches on our team.
All right. So go ahead. Biblical Parenting. Dwight has posted it on there. So if you're interested, well, I think that's all we have time for. We do have a couple more questions, but as I told you, our participants love to ask questions, and we love giving you the opportunity to do that. So thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. You've taught us a lot, and there's more to learn, and we're just really grateful for it.
Well, thank you, Barb. It's grateful to be with you. I look forward to coming back again.